Salutations, everyone. Welcome to the AOE podcast. I don't know what number it is because I made some mistakes in the last one planning them out, but regardless. Today's AOE podcast, I'll be talking about, and I will be alone, I do apologize, the couple of people that I thought could be helpful in this discussion were busy and, just don't want to wait. So we're going to be talking about Game of Thrones and Avengers Endgame, the two big media finale culminations, all within a couple of weeks of each other. Obviously, both of them long time coming. Game of Thrones has been going for 9 years, and this is 11 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Iron Man 1. So we'll go with Game of Thrones because, that's the fresh one that everyone's talking about right now. It just ended this past weekend, and people have had some opinions over these past, really over this entirety of the last season, even more so than the season before, which was also short. I feel like there is some common ground that all fans, or the vast majority of fans, can agree on. The first being, we wish there was more, right? We wish there were more episodes. We wish that this wasn't the end. George R.R. Martin didn't want it to end. HBO didn't want it to end. And the actors definitely wanted it to end. They've been doing it for a long time and want to, cash in on their fame, which some have in the off season, but not nearly as much as they wanted. To do other movies, other shows. Rob Stark, for instance, is in the Netflix show The Bodyguard, and he won an Emmy for it. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. People are. I know Nikolaj has done a couple of things, and he actually has a movie coming out. Jamie Lannister, if you don't know the name, I forget what his last name is. But the good old Kingslayer. He's been in a couple of things. And, now, everyone else has the freedom to do what they will. Even if they had done other side projects, such as Sophie Turner being in the X-Men movies, and she has a big one coming up, they'll be able to expound upon those opportunities and be able to shoot more things in more seasons and, do what they want to do. So you can understand from the actor's point of view that they were most of them were kind of done with it, even though they loved the experience and kind of didn't want it to end. They thought, it was ready to end and they wanted to move forward. So you can understand that, whether you can like it and dislike it because, we really like these actors and we want to see them in more things. And a lot of us were introduced to these actors for the first time in this show, and it made almost all of them famous, more so than any of their other previous works. Emilia Clarke's Terminator movie didn't do that well, even though I thought it was kind of underrated, just because of the fact that the characters weren't stupid, but, that's getting its own not rehash, but like an alternate timeline where it didn't happen kind of a thing. But the fans, we didn't want it to end. HBO, they're making money, right? Buku bucks, the finale. And I think the last 3 episodes were the most viewed episode ever that HBO ever had. And they kept breaking that record with each new release up to the finale. So you understand from their point of view. The showrunners, whom everyone is directing all of their hatred and criticism towards, they had this weird timeline of how many hours the story was going to take. And they've said this, years and years and years ago, how many hours that they thought was needed to tell this story, which is, I think, a really weird parameter. I think we can all agree that that's kind of a weird thing for them to say exactly to the hour of how long this story should take. And, the past couple seasons we had fewer episodes, but they were longer episodes. So that's kind of a give and take kind of a thing when it comes to something like the Battle of Winterfell. You needed a longer episode, and that was the longest episode at the time. I don't think it was broken in the last in 2 episodes after that, or 2 episodes after that. But it might have been. But at the time, it was, these are long episodes. These are almost feature length. Some of them are, feature length. Your average movie isn't that short, but some of them are. So I think we can all be thankful that we were able to watch this incredible show, but we can all agree on a few things. The hour limit was kind of weird, and we wanted more, right? We wanted more episodes. We want more things to be fleshed out. People started criticizing last season because of how quickly things were going. People started traveling faster. In previous seasons, it would take much longer for someone to go from, Dragonstone to, Winterfell, or, from the north to the south, or things like that. They kind of seem to happen rather quick. And that I don't have a ton of problem with, because you need to tell the story, right? And obviously, it doesn't matter how many episodes these last 2 seasons had, or how good or bad the writing was going to be. The problem that we were always going to encounter was the fact that the show got past the books. That wasn't going to change, and you can't be angry about that, because the showrunners weren't going to put the series on hold for another 10, 15, 20 years for the last 2 books to come out. I think it's 2, right? That was not going to happen. So it was, we were lucky to have the show start when it did, to have the actors at the ages that they were, to have Peter Dinklage, to have, Macy Williams and Sophie Turner, and to have the perfect Brienne of Tarth imaginable, to have all those actors in their prime at the right age, to do the roles that some of them seem born to do. We were lucky to have that, because remember, these books started in 1990 or 1991, 92, something like that. I have only read the first book, and I've read part of the second book, and we can agree that the books are really good. And yes, it is a cliche to say, or for it to be, to have the book better than the movie or the whatever other media it was then portrayed in. And yes, we have seen manga be outpaced by the anime. We have seen this, with Bleach, that had, hundreds of episodes, and then it caught up to the manga, and, it wasn't finished. And then, they had to deal with the hiatus of that. And we had, Full Metal Alchemist, and they had to do Brotherhood. So it was more truthful to the manga, because the endings are insanely different. But there is a little bit of a difference with the fact that these are full-length novels. Having read the first book and seen every single episode of the show of Game of Thrones, obviously, it was very impressive to me, retrospectively, to see that everything in the first book, save for maybe a scene or 2 where Catelyn Stark has to go up to go see her sister, that long night ride across these rocky cliffs on donkeys and stuff. I don't remember that in the show. Granted, I've only seen every episode once or twice, so I don't have the best memory. Maybe that isn't in the series, but everything else was verbatim from the book to the show, and it was awesome. And it would be, in an ideal world, all the books would have been done. We would have had all the source material for the showrunners to really have a good grasp about how many hours that really needed to tell this story, and to have the plot lines that needed to be done to be played out. Obviously, there are things from the books that they did not focus on in the series, and some people have always been mad about that, how they focused on, they had Missandei and Grey Worm's relationship, but they didn't have, this character, or they didn't, have Benjen in it as much, or there are some characters that people really liked that weren't in the show, or weren't in it very much, or their storyline was slightly altered, or wasn't really focused on because of maybe where they were wasn't of consequence. Things aren't going to be identical. It's not going to be one for one. You're not going to have every single storyline, and I think we all should understand that. But so in a perfect world, all the books would have been done, right? But that wasn't ever going to be a reality. And Martin obviously has been dedicated to working on the books. He has canceled all appearances that he's had for at least a year now so that he can focus on his work. But we also know, and people have to understand, that Martin gave the showrunners the plot line and the major beats of the story in case he passed or couldn't finish the books, or the show had to end, which obviously was going to be the most likely outcome, that they could do end the story the way that it's supposed to end, even though that those final books are not out. So George has said that, there are going to be differences, and the outline and the things that he told them this was like from 8-9 years ago. So obviously, he, as pretty much all authors have with their series, they have an outline of what they want to do, when they want to do it, and they have the ultimate outcome done. I think J.K. Rowling said that the first thing she ever wrote was the final chapter of the final book. I do believe that is something that she has said, or it was, if not the first thing she wrote, one of the first things that she wrote. And you can understand that from a storyteller's perspective. And I'm sorry I don't have a storyteller with me to help harp on this issue, but authors tend to know where their story is going to go and how it's going to get there without having written the entire thing in full. And obviously they have changes about, what characters do what and who dies and who interacts, who falls in love or does this or does that. So even if let's pretend that this final season was everything that George R.R. Martin wanted or had planned the ending to be, that was still his rough draft from 8-9 years ago, 10 years ago. So there was going to be changes regardless, because that's just how writing works, right? But still the major beats are going to be there. You cannot expect to read the final book and expect Daenerys to not burn down King's Landing, and you cannot expect Jon to not kill her. You cannot expect Bran to not end up on the Iron Throne in the end. I don't think those are things that you can reasonably expect. Those are things people were super pissed about, right? You cannot expect those things not to happen in the book. Now, we know it's not going to happen exactly the same way. There's going to be certain plots and storylines that Martin is going to change, alter, and develop things that he had told the showrunners and things that he hadn't told them because he hadn't fleshed them out. And obviously, the writers had to deal with subplots their own way because they weren't given instruction about it, because Martin had a lot of work to do, right? He didn't have every single thing fleshed out, but he had the basic outline and the major beats and maybe specific scenes and specific moments that he wanted, that he harped on, needed to be done in this order or in this way. But, obviously the books are going to be different, ever since we passed the books in the show. These past 3 seasons, I believe, maybe it was 3.5 seasons, something like that. So, I know I'm not on the grandest of pedestals, having not read all of the books, and none of us have actually read all of the books, but I haven't read all the ones that have been published, just like 1.25 of them. But we all can say we enjoyed most of the series, right? But there was always going to things that were going to disappoint us, because that's this world, right? People were super caught off guard and disappointed when the hero, the main character in the first book, gets killed at the end, right? Everyone thought this was the Ned Stark story, it's the story of the Starks, but Ned's at the head of it, he's the hand of the king, right? So everything's going to be focusing and revolving around him. And people thought that, with most stories, that the character that's mainly focused on is going to be safe for the vast majority of the time, right? If not the entirety of the series. So many people were caught off guard and surprised and angry that Ned Stark was killed at the end of the first book. And people have always been upset and caught off guard about, deaths. You have the Red Wedding, obviously, and certain characters turning towards different paths and different channels, whether they deviate from the books or not. Obviously, there are definitely some characters in the show that deviated from their character in the book whilst we still had the books, right? These books were already out. So you could argue that there was no excuse to change these characters, but there's always going to be artistic liberties, and George R. R. Martin understands this, and he kind of likes it to an extent, right? And I think we all should honor different tellings of a same story. It's like, having all these different Batmans or Jokers or Sherlock Holmeses throughout all these times, or Doctor Who's, all these different versions of the same character. And I know the time between the books and the show isn't very large, and it's not like an original take on this series. It is an adaptation after all, but the book's always going to be different from the movie or the TV show, right? That's something we can all understand and agree with. And sometimes the movie is better. Sometimes the show is better. Sometimes the anime is better. While, I think you can safely say that most of the time the book was better, the graphic novel was better, the manga was better, or, the original version, whatever it be, from a certain country or from a certain author or whatever certain medium it may be. Most of the case, I find, obviously, the original source material tends to be better. Sometimes it's not. And there definitely are examples of this. One that comes straight to mind is not that I've seen or read the book or movie, but The Notebook, the movie is better than the book from what I've read. And there's a couple other outliers out there. But for the most part, most people do agree, or at the very least, you're usually quite similar. For instance, Cloud Atlas was a very, very good book. I loved that book. I read it after the film, of course. I did not know about the book before the film. It was one of those books that was deemed to be unfilmable. But the Wachowski siblings, as well as the third writer, his name escapes me, but they did a fantastic job, and I think the movie is just as good, if maybe not a little better than the novel. It obviously had some changes. In fact, if you have seen the movie, you know that reincarnation is kind of a theme throughout, and it was actually the writers of the movie who came up with the idea of using the same characters, or using the same actors for different characters. And the writer of the book was dumbstruck about how genius that was. That was something that he didn't even think of, and he was astonished. And there was times, and this is from him, from the man himself, said that there was at times during filming of the movie where he had to go to the writers and be like, did I write this line or did you guys write this line? Because, it's so good. So like when a source material is treasured and the adaptation is done properly, you can get something truly magical and have something that's just as good, if not better than the original. It does happen. I'm not saying that that's the case in Game of Thrones, especially since I haven't read the book, and obviously none of us have read the last two books, but this was going to be a problem that we were going to run into, right? So I think it's really difficult to get mad. It's like, oh, so, well, this storyline came out of nowhere, or this was poorly written. It's like, these are the same showrunners that have done every other season, and this is the same story that George R. R. Martin told them what the story was. So it's kind of coming out of left field, saying, man, these writers are crap. It's like, You've loved the series in the first, 6 seasons or whatever. And it's the same guys. I used to like this story, now the story's crap. It's still George R. R. Martin's story. I don't think when the book comes out, it's going to be Dany and Jon falling in love and getting married and not using the dragons, or Arya not killing the Night King. There might be different ways about how things happen, and maybe the timings of things are going to be different. But I don't think there's going to be major things that are quite different. Maybe in the book, Arya doesn't kill the Night King, but when people are so hung up on the prince or princess that was promised, the prophecy, and it's like, people, if we're going to get upset over every fictional prophecy that doesn't come true, we're going to be here till the cows come home. How many movies and books and TV shows where there's a prophecy, does it actually come true when it's not a super vague one? Like, there's going to be a hero who gets this sword and kills the king. You know, that shit does happen. But when it comes to most major prophecies, especially in books, that shit almost never comes true. And not everything is Harry Potter. And you can argue that the prophecy in Harry Potter was also off or self-fulfilling in a way, or that it's really about Neville, right? Because Harry wasn't really super powerful or, you know, an amazing wizard. He even admits himself of how lucky he gets. Because if you take a look at what happens in all the books and the films, which are very faithful adaptations, obviously with their own, you know, differences and omissions and things like that, that Harry isn't the vehicle of every single major plot point, where sometimes things just happen to him, or he gets lucky that, you know, Quirrell touched him in the face, or he gets lucky that Fox brings him the hat, the sorting hat, which has the sword of Gryffindor, and so he can beat the basilisk, or him just doing nothing for an entire year and then not understanding why Snape has to kill Dumbledore, right? So he's good at conjuring the Patronus, right? Like, that's one thing that he is actually exceptional at. But he also knows not to give up, and he gives everyone else a reason, you know, as the leaders, like, oh, he's the chosen one, he's the prophecy. So he kind of becomes what he needs to be in order to fulfill the ultimate goal of beating Voldemort, right? So prophecies don't always come true, and people were always speculating. I was like, oh, you know, it's Dany because she's born from fire, or oh, it's Jon because he was resurrected, or, you know, it's the Hound because, you know, he was brought back and, you know, he was burned by his brother and you know, and things. And then people are like, oh, maybe it's actually Arya because she ends up killing the Night King, and then she ends up, you know, covered in dust and fire and saltpeter and shit after King's Landing gets smoked. But quite often prophecies just don't come true in books and movies and TVs, guys. If you're not over that by now, then you're not old enough to watch Game of Thrones. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how you can get angry at that. I know the prophecy is way more talked about in the books than in the show, where it's only slightly mentioned, I think, like one time or two times. And, you know, it seems kind of straightforward, right? That it's Dany because of, oh, the red star, or the red comet, right? That happens, and Stannis thinks it's a sign for him, and so does Melisandre. But that's the same night that the pyre of Khal Drogo happens, and she gets into the fire with the eggs and birds of dragons, right? So it all seems pretty straightforward. So, and yes, you could argue maybe it's this character or that character, but it really only pointed towards Dany. So, and people have the problem, right, of the Night King being killed or disposed of before the finale. But it's like, people, there needs to be a story. The Night King isn't the end goal. You know, there's all this hype, right? They were the ultimate enemy, and yes, they were. But you don't always have to save the ultimate enemy for last, right? And obviously, the Night King, people were always speculating, right, on who is it? With some really ludicrous theories. Like, people are just like, oh, it was, you know, it's Rhaegar Targaryen, it's the first one, which, you know, I guess it could have been. Or some people said it was Ned Stark. It's like, well, we know Littlefinger brought Ned Stark's remains back to Winterfell. I was like, I don't know how you come up with that. So I wasn't expecting anything to come up with like, oh, the Night King's lineage or anything like that. And yes, it was kind of weird how they handled the Three-Eyed Raven. Having not read the books, I don't know what the differences are and how they handled that. But the importance of the Three-Eyed Raven never seemed to be established. outside of, and maybe this is the entire point, what Sam said, and that's all we are is our history, and the three-eyed raven is the story keeper. He knows all of our history. And so if the Night King eliminates that, then he kind of takes away what we are as a people of, Westerosians or the Andals, if you will. And that's a pretty valid point. And if that's all that it is, I think that's good enough. Because, what else could the three-eyed raven be? I mean, yes, he has abilities, but it's not like it turns him into, like Dark Phoenix or, sorry to use, another Sophie Turner character, but it doesn't make him a super powerful, unstoppable entity, or something that's, a mirror or a foil to the Night King. But obviously he wants to destroy the three-eyed raven. He's able to, go after Max Van Sydow and kill him before he transfers it over to Bran. And people obviously have a hard time with Bran. Mostly people are harking on Tyrion's speech at the end where he said that everyone loves a good story. And he's absolutely right, by the way. That was fantastically handled on what brings people together. And a story is perfect in his description of it. It cannot be defeated, and it gets spread and it becomes myth and untouchable. And if you take a look at like other pieces of fiction that have their own mythos, their own lore, it is really all about stories that gets the army hyped up. You take a look at Voltron, where the Galra have their saying what is it? It's kept I want to say Semper Fi. I know that's not it, but it's Rapid Saw, right? Rapid Saw is their salute, Rapid Saw, and it's explained in one of the episodes that Rapid Saw is, I think it was like a ship or a captain that refused to like turn back and turn the tide of like a huge battle when it didn't seem like things were going to go their way. So it's like a thing of like, never get up, never give up, never surrender, show no mercy kind of a thing. It was that story that held that power with them, like remember the Alamo, right? That's a big story, even though the Alamo was, kind of a botched job on all sides. And the point of the Alamo is the fact that General Santa Anna focused his forces on the Alamo when that's not where he should have been focusing his forces, right? But, I'm not here to teach you guys history about, America or Westeros. So stories are big. And I think that was dutifully explained by Tyrion. And people were like, Jon Snow has the best story. It's like, well, like, yeah, obviously he does. And everybody knows that. Bastard son is actually a Targaryen, head of the Night's Watch, king in the north, right? Is able to ride a dragon, fight the White Walkers and all that shit. But, like, they're not gonna let him go, right? The Unsullied aren't gonna let him go because he killed their queen, right? So, like that wasn't an option. So many fans are like under the assumption like it was an option to choose Jon as their king. The Unsullied were never going to let that happen. That seemed insanely self-explanatory, especially since, with Danny gone, he had the most rightful claim to the throne. The second of which would have been Tyrion, because actually, it would have been Jaime had he been alive. If you paid attention to the books, it should not have been Cersei. She kind of just usurped the throne, honestly, because like under the succession, it would have since all of the Baratheon kids, quote unquote Baratheon kids, died, it would have gone further up the Baratheon tree, right? And that actually would have gone to the marriage of Tywin's like great grandfather or something like that. So it would have gone down the Lannister line and would have ended up on Jaime. But Cersei with the Hound, or with the Mountain, kind of just is like, I'm queen, and if anyone says no, good luck keeping your head on your shoulders. So she kind of usurped it there. But if you wanted to go down the lineage of Robert Baratheon, who was, yes, a usurper, but, named true king, if you wanted to keep down his line, it would have been Tyrion, and that's what a lot of people wanted, and it's what some people expected. It's actually what I expected as well, because in the first book, the first character that's ever described as a king is Tyrion. When they're at Winterfell and he's having his conversation with Jon, and he like enters the great hall because he's like out of wine, right? And when he opens the door, the shadow that's cast is longer than Tyrion, and he like stands as a king or something like that. It's in the first couple of chapters of the first book. So that made me think, because, you know, writers are, you know, they like to plant those seeds quite early, and they're like romantic couplets where something ends the way it started, which they ended up doing anyway, at least in the show, where the show starts off with two people on horses leaving, going north of the wall, and that's how it ends as well. A lot of people expected and wanted Tyrion to be the king because he's like the most popular character, right? And obviously, yeah, there is some misogyny in that, but while a lot of people were rooting for and empathized with Daenerys's rise to the throne, a lot of people, not so many people, even the ones that were rooting for her, didn't really expect her to have it in the end. I don't think anyone expected Cersei to win the Game of Thrones, but not a lot of people had their money on Bran, right? Actually, Bran was one of the more likely chances, according to like the betting books in the UK. They had like a gambling odds like you would for a sports event, and Bran and Sansa were pretty high up there, and they actually both ended up becoming king and queen in their own senses, which was kind of surprising. So whoever made those odds were on the money, as one would say. But in the end, people kind of got what they wanted, right? A lot of people expected Jon to end up killing Dany after she goes Mad Queen, right? That's what some people had expected for a number of years. And some people expected and wanted Tyrion to end up being the king in the end. And in the end, he kind of is, right? Because he's the hand of the king. And Bran has no, lust for power or control. He does make sense as the king. And actually, Gwendolyn Christie, the actress that plays Brienne, actually predicted this in an interview back in at least 5 years ago. In an interview, she said that because we're always seeing things from his perspective, right? He has all of these dreams and these visions. We don't even know if what we're seeing is in real time. We don't know if what we're watching on the show even is the present. Bran even says, I spend most of my time in the past. So that's actually a really good point from Gwendolyn about what we're actually watching, right? And some people were anticipating that the book would end with like George R. R. Martin being a really old Samwell Tarly closing the book of the Song of Ice and Fire, right? And that would have been nice, and I believe Martin was offered a cameo role in the finale, but turned it down because he's busy. Super understandable. And yes, Sam did end up having the Song of Ice and Fire written, and it was weirdly and hilariously omitting Tyrion's role. I honestly kind of had a problem with that, but it was meant to be a joke at Tyrion's expense when he ends up pretty much being the most powerful person, right? Because the hand of the king is, the one that makes things happen, or wipes the shit, or whatever metaphor that you want to use for the hand of the king. But they are really the ones that are in power. And since Bran is sure the final say, and the shows will tell people what direction that he wants them to take, in the end, all the minutia of ruling is really up to Tyrion. So in the end, he pretty much really is the ruler. We know that Bran doesn't care for ruling and doesn't want to be, but in the end, he knows he has to be, right? Yes, he did say, I can't be the lord of anything, right, on the Three-Eyed Raven. And people were like, well, what was even the point of him being the Three-Eyed Raven? And it does make the most sense to be the king. Obviously, if you want a ruler, right, you want it to be somebody who doesn't want it, right? Ned was the perfect choice, obviously, and Robert, of course, knew that when he made him hand and wanted to make him I forget the term, but the temp king until his Joffrey, or his heir, according to Ned's not forged, but his handwriting, where he didn't dictate everything that Robert said verbatim. But Robert knew that he would have been a better king. He's like, you could have taken the throne if you wanted it, when he was in that throne room and he had Jaime step down from the Iron Throne, right? So you want somebody who doesn't want to be the ruler. You don't want someone who wants the power, right? And that is, breaking the wheel and having, obviously, yes, Sam wanted to invent democracy, and you can kind of see that coming, especially from a character like him. But of course they would laugh at that. Obviously, in that sort of world, of course that would be laughed at, just as it would be in our society, in the medieval times, or whatever you would expect or call these times likewise to be in the Westerosian world. I know I do not know what is west of Westeros, and kind of good for Arya. Someone on Twitter said it very well about how the Game of Thrones was played, and I don't remember exactly, but like Cersei was playing the game hard and for keeps. Dany was playing to win. Jon didn't want to play. Arya didn't care about playing, and Drogon said, "Fuck y'all game," because he kind of just pieces out, right? And Bran wants to keep track on Drogon, which you can very much understand, because holy shit, are dragons powerful. I mean, we saw that when they ended up blasting the Lannister army as they were coming back from taking down the Tyrells, right? We saw the power of the dragons, and obviously the ballistas that they had were designed to crush a dragon, and they were suitable for the job, right? Bronn had his shots and missed, but was clearly a threat. People had had problems with how those things were handled and like how dumb or smart the dragons were, right? But like, she lost her dragon to the Iron Fleet's ballistas because she didn't know they had them, right? It's not, and people are like, oh, how come at the end, they were useless against fighting Drogon? Well, she knew that they had them now, right? Obviously, Bronn had shot one at her, but that was, not at the castle, and there weren't all these armaments, and there wasn't one on every boat. So she was caught off guard, right? People are arguing like, oh, first the dragons are super weak and shitty and dumb, and now they're smart and the ballistas are useless. Well, like, when you know how to fight them, right? They're very slow to aim and have a slow reload, right? If you know what kind of angle to attack from, and knowing that that's the first threat that you need to take out, then yes, it can be quite simple. And that was the only tool that they had in order to combat the dragons, other than using the innocence of the people of King's Landing, as the weakness of Daenerys. So, okay, let's talk about Daenerys' downfall, right? That was the most harked on thing that people had an issue with, was Dany doing what she did. And you cannot say this came out of left field. Otherwise, you just were not paying attention to the last 8 seasons, right? You take a look at from the beginning where Drago dumps the golden crown on her brother, and she's just kind of like, huh, he's not a dragon, because dragons don't burn. Yes, he was an asshole, right? So you can, kind of forgive that one. But the way that she's rising to power and the impulses that she has have always shown the same shades of the Dany that we end up seeing at the end, where the ends are justifying the means, where she has to show power. She's always done what she's done in spite of her initial urges, right? The best things that she's done, the peaceful things that she's done, have always been because of what Tyrion or what Varys or what any of her small council had deterred her from doing. It was always them in her ear to get her to do the right thing. And you always saw shades of her even going past this by burning the Tarleys when Tyrion's like, no, these are, good men, don't punish the son for the actions of the father, kind of a thing. But she wanted to, throw down the gauntlet. She wanted to hammer home that you do not rise against me. You will bend the knee, kind of a thing. So like we always saw this from Dany. She wanted to burn the slave masters, and people like, well, remember when she said she didn't want to be the Queen of the Ashes? And she did say that because that's what Tyrion said. He said that, and then she reiterated that, and he gives her that look. It's like, hey, you're using my words. And she did have an idealistic view of what could have been, right? She was down the path that many people wanted her to have, whether we thought she would end up in the winner at the end or not. But all the things that happened to her, you can definitely understand the fall. And there are plenty of people like, man, I hope she just burns everything to the ground, and then she does, and then they're all pissed, right? Fans never know what they want, whether it's a video game or a movie or a TV show. Fans do not know what they want. They say they want something, then they get it, and then they're pissed. Or they say they want something, they get something else, and they end up liking it, right? People are really bad. Fans are really bad at communicating what they want, because they honestly don't know. And yes, a work of fiction does end up becoming, part of the people, and people have really shitted on George Lucas for special editions and prequels and all this crap, right? So I don't need to, harken home about how people feel about the changes or things like that. But there's a part where, yes, it does become something else after it's given away. It's no longer just yours, right? When a creator gives something, it's no longer theirs. It does create a life of its own, and it becomes the fans, right? But like Star Wars fans, Game of Thrones fans became insanely entitled to think that everything needs to be done their way, that they own it, and it needs to be done the way that they envision, right? It has to be their fan fiction, where their Han Solo or their Boba Fett or their Jon Snow, right? People have had these long delusions, especially when something's long running, right? Where they have a lot of time to build anticipation of what a finale will be. And yes, there have been some television finales that really shit the bed. Like Lost, people really hated. I don't know, never watched a single episode of it. The Sopranos, that had a whole controversy on how that ended. But actually, when I heard about it, it made perfect sense, because Tony Soprano actually has a conversation earlier that season or the season before or something, like where he says, your life really does end in the middle of a sentence. And you can hearken that back to the book that's in Fault in Our Stars. I forget the title of it, but it's someone's journal, and it ends in the middle of a sentence, and that really is how life is, right? Life does end in the middle of a sentence. You never get the finale that you want. And having never seen an episode of The Sopranos, but knowing how the series ended, it seemed pretty clear from the very words of Tony Soprano that he was killed. That's how it ended. He was, most presumably shot and killed in the middle of that sentence, and it just cuts to black, right? Because that's just how life is, especially if your life ends very quickly and violently like that. It is just a simple turn off of the lights. So people have obviously had issues with finales of things before. Seinfeld was really weird. Never thought it was entertaining in the first place, but if you don't know, they get arrested at the end because they don't report a crime based off of a fake law that doesn't exist, where if you see something, you have to say something or whatever. But, so there have been plenty of finales that have been trashed on over time, whether it be usually television shows, honestly, because those are the things that have a lot of anticipation and go out through, as much of a decade or more. And sometimes the story really does go downhill. Take a look like at Heroes, where the first season was so perfect, and then they kind of ruined it by making a second season with the same characters and changing and altering things, which they tried to make some explanations for, and some of it worked and some of it didn't, because like all of a sudden the theming where a character was completely changed or altered in a way that didn't seem as thematic or true to the vision of the first series. And if you actually read about it, Heroes was supposed to be one series of one characters, and then the next season was supposed to be a completely different story. So they had written an entire first season that was a book-ended story, right? But it was so successful that the pressure was on to keep all these beloved characters on and stretch out these storylines, which wasn't originally planned to be that way. And that's why the quality fell off, and that show just faded into obscurity. And they brought it back with Heroes Reborn with a lot of the similar characters. And it was good because they had a bookend story that they wanted to tell. And that's why Heroes Reborn was good. But it's always a folly when it comes to a lot of medias, and you see this, with cartoons or with sitcoms or something like that, where they overstay their welcome, and because of that, they're not able to end with an ending, with a finale, or the finale that they do have is not very good. There are some shows that have had multiple finales where like this could have been the ending, such as Friends or Futurama, where there were multiple places where they thought they were canceled. King of the Hill as well, where they thought they were canceled, they thought they weren't going to get renewed, and they had a kind of like a soft ending, and it still worked as an ending, or it also worked just as a season finale. And so, there's definitely a delicate fine line that you have to cross when working with the uncertainty of a television show of getting renewed and not. And then you have something like Gravity Falls, where very successful, but the creator, he was like, it's going to be, I think it was 4 seasons, right? Maybe it was 3, but he's like, that's what it's going to be because that's the story that I have. And even though it was super successful, and I'm sure he could have, been signed on for more seasons, he had the story that he wanted to tell, and he told it, right? And that's super commendable. You can understand wanting to prolong that, and plenty of television shows have done that. And, insert memes here about this or that television show that ended up decaying over time or overstaying their welcome. But that honestly does happen. And a lot of that has to do with anticipation, and a lot of that has to do with the uncertainty of the business. Obviously, Game of Thrones didn't have this, but it's the buildup of the uncertainty of what's going to happen with your favorite characters. So you kind of have it in your head. You have a long time to formulate and concentrate on prophecies and things like that, to where you're going to have a more solid end in your mind than you would be in something that didn't last as long, right? Or something that was shorter, like a film or a film series. But take a look at Star Wars, where it's spanning multiple decades, and people start to have more and more ideas solidified in their head. And when it doesn't end up being what they had hoped and thought, it's more of a disappointment than if, it was just 3 movies over the course of 5 years. There's not as much time to build things up, and there's not as much material, right? But when you have so many books, so many episodes to build off of, there's going to be so many different ways that people see things. So it is definitely an issue of becoming a victim of your own success in a way. And there was never going to be a finale that pleased everybody. Obviously there was going to be surprises. There's no way that someone predicted like the 3 main things that were going to happen in, say, the finale of Game of Thrones in that final episode. A lot of people saw one of them coming, and some of them speculated on another thing, but I don't think there was a single person who thought that Arya was going to kill the Night King, and Jon being a Targaryen ended up being the rift between him and Daenerys. And she ended up burning King's Landing to the ground, and Jaime went back to die with Cersei, and Bran ended up becoming the king of the 6 kingdoms, and Sansa becoming the queen of Winterfell. Right? I don't think there was a person out there who expected those all to happen, but at the end. And Gwendolyn Christie also said this, it kind of makes sense for someone out of left field to end up being the winner at the end, because at the end, it's not about like the Thanos quote where reality is often disappointing, and we'll get to Avengers here in a bit, but just to wrap things up, it's not about subverting expectations just to subvert expectations. And obviously when you have a long story in mind, it's definitely more forgivable as a viewer to see something because they know that there's a plan. Like, oh, they killed Ned, but obviously this is the first book, so this was the plan all along. But all of this was really planned. They knew in the end what was going to happen. They've known the entire time since they started the very first season. They knew what the major bullet points were going to be, and you can say that you felt some things were rushed and some things didn't make, like people like, oh, what was even the point of Jon being a Targaryen? What was even the point of Bran being the three-eyed raven? And it's like, people are always trying to find meaning in things that just are, right? And people were like really pissed that, oh, not enough people died in the Battle of Winterfell. It's like, there still needs to be a story. You still need to have characters. And people, pissing and moaning about plot armor. It's like, it's not plot armor to still have characters to tell the story in your last 3 episodes, you idiots. So, and people always have a problem when a woman is in the spotlight because like, oh, but men, it should have been Jon that killed the Night King, not Arya, Mary Sue. Fuck your Mary Sues. You would never say that about a guy. You never say that about Luke Skywalker or Jon Snow. Arya earned it, and she was fucking badass, and it was awesome. It was perfect storytelling about how her story arc went, about how the Hound's story arc went. You can argue that you didn't like how Jon's story went, but Jon was still true to his character the way that he always was. Same for Dany. Dany was still the same character that she always was and has been built up these past 9 years. So to say that, these shitty writers that you said were good the past 6 or 7 years, depending on your feelings about the previous season, and now all of a sudden they're shit. Come on, guys. Come on. It's just the entitlement of fans. And this happens whenever something gets super duper popular, like Star Wars or Game of Thrones. They feel like they're entitled to own this thing and control everything about it. And it's like, no, it didn't end my way. Boo-hoo. Shit writers. Mary Sue's. This is my character. It's just, that's just the way that things go. People get pissed that whenever a woman has power because they're so used to their power trips as boys, where like the main character is always a boy, therefore it always has to be a boy. What's with this Rey thing in the middle of my Star Wars? Star Wars is all about boys and it's for boys. Boo hoo. You get those assholes, and you'll also get the people where it's like, just because it isn't twisty or turny the way that they wanted it to be, or because their theory wasn't right, or because their character didn't have the story that they wanted. Like, who in Game of Thrones had the story that you wanted? Who? Like, honestly, maybe Brienne? Like, she ended up, but she didn't end up with Jaime in the end. She got with him, right? And she ended up being the queen, the King's Guard, as many people hoped and predicted that she was going to be, right, in an idealistic world. But and then you have people saying it's like, oh, she, is wasting time talking about a man that devalues her character. It's like, no, it doesn't. Oh, calling Bran the Broken is like, abled phobic, or, just like, Jesus Christ, people. It's like, that is the world that it's in. Are you expecting women to vote and for there to be, this handicap parking and Special Olympics, and for there to be a TV show with a black female lead? It's like, no, this is Westeros. This is not a progressive place. So yeah, they're going to call the short guy a dwarf. They're going to call the guy whose legs don't work Bran the Broken. It's not ableist. It's not sexist. None of this crap are legitimate criticisms of this story. This is like, oh, well, women are in brothels and they're prostitutes and whores. It's like, that's the world that it is. And if you have a problem with it the 9th year that it's going on, that, women are treated unfairly in Westeros, or they aren't most of the major characters, or this or that, then boo fucking who to you. I don't understand how people can get mad in the 8th or 9th year of something where it's been consistent throughout the major plots and themes and characters. And Jamie did not renege on his redemption arc, right? He ended up saving Brienne. He ended up knighting her. He ended up fighting for the living, but he knew in the end who it was going to come down to. He knew he was Cersei's prisoner. He knew that she was a bad and hateful person, but the things you do for love, right? And then people are like, oh, Bran was the bad guy all along because he knew all this was going to happen. And like, oh, I don't want to be a lord. Well, fuck yeah, I want to be king. Bran doesn't want the power. He knows it has to be him, right? This is the peaceful solution. And people are like, oh, he knew what Dany was going to do or whatever. It's like, we don't know exactly what was going through his head or what he knew or didn't know, and past, present, and future kind of a things. It's like, take the story for what the story is being told, right? Anyways, that's I thought it was pretty good. I loved the series. It might be the best live action television show ever made up to this point. Fantastic. Yes, I can agree. The last 2 seasons were shorter than they should have been. There were things that we wanted to be more fleshed out that were not. It's a shame that it went past the book, so we didn't get as many amazing lines verbatim from the book that, Tyrion or Brienne or Bronn or Tywin or Arya or anybody said, right? We didn't get the perfect version of this series, but we got a really fucking good one. And I thought the finale was good. It wrapped everything up. It told the kind of ending that it should have been, right? In the end, it was a story about the Starks, and ultimately that is what it ended up being, right? And, people can say, oh, Sansa ruined it by, blabbering to Tyrion. Jon says that, I wish you never told me. And yeah, if nobody told anyone that Jon was a Targaryen, and if Missandei didn't die and say, burn the fuckers, then maybe Dany doesn't do it. There was a lot of teeter-tottering, but instead of teetering, it tottered. And you are going to have to accept that that is also a valid story to tell. And at the end, I think it was really wonderfully told in an amazingly cinematic 9 seasons of a fantastic adaptation of a really good book series. So that's Game of Thrones. Let's get into Endgame, right? It's something that people were actually considerate about spoilers, right? I didn't see a ton of spoilers about Endgame, but when it comes to Game of Thrones, it was like, oh, if you didn't see it, on the East Coast the second it came out, you better not be on the internet or you're fucked. Weird dichotomy between that. People were really nice about Endgame spoilers, but anyway, Endgame was fantastic. One of the issues that I had anticipating having with Endgame is like, how are you going to be better than Infinity War? Like, that was when I was like, if Endgame is going to be bad, is going to be upsetting or not live up to it, it's because Infinity War was so good, right? But Endgame was fan freaking tastic. It was such a perfect way to wrap things up. Yes, there were things that we saw coming, right? We knew Tony was going to die, right? We knew Robert Downey Jr.'s contract is up. We knew all these actors' contracts were up. We knew that, either Steve was going to die or, wasn't going to be Captain America anymore because, contracts, right? There's a lot of things that we knew that were going to go and what would be thematically appropriate. Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow dying was not something we were super sure of because we knew that she had a movie, and now we know, okay, it's going to be a prequel, right? It can't be post Endgame. It's going to have to be like pre Iron Man 2, right? Which is absolutely fine. And, maybe Hawkeye's in it. Maybe they're in Budapest or maybe it's, an origin story. Who knows? But a lot of people have been excited since, she was the first female Avenger that was introduced in the MCU and has not had her own movie, even though she's been there longer than almost everybody. So, there were definitely surprises. And originally it was written for Hawkeye to die on Vormir. But I think that was handled beautifully. You know, the loving, like sibling-esque relationship that they had for each other. And it's like, it's understood. They don't have to say it or have a big moment. They show that it's like, oh, one of us has to die. Obviously it's me because I fucking love you and I don't want you to die. And, you know, I've done some bad things and, you know, the monster that I've become, you know, that I've done. It's like, I don't think we're both talking about the same person. And that was handled beautifully. And, you know, we knew there was going to be a Guardians of the Galaxy, right? So we knew it was just like, oh, how are they bringing Gamora back? And they did an interesting way of doing it, right? To where it's a completely different Gamora pre-meeting Peter in Guardians 1, right? It wasn't like technically pre-Guardians because in the timeline, it starts at the, you know, they get to the very beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy 1, when he gets the Power Stone, right? But she never has that interaction with Peter because Thanos, you know, is able to go through Nebula's minds where there's two Nebulas crossing pathways, which is a way to do it. Maybe you have a problem with how they were going to do it, but you know, they had to fight Thanos in the end, right? And I actually was expecting that. I was not expecting them to fight the same Thanos that they fought at the end of Infinity War, because the dude snapped and he did his thing. And it was kind of a surprise on like how quickly they dealt with, you know, Infinity War's Thanos, but it was thematically appropriate. And yes, people saw like the time skip coming because of like Black Widow's hair in the trailers or something like that. But I think that was handled superbly well. And we knew the Quantum Realm was going to, you know, go into this when we saw how Infinity War ended, or if you didn't think of it then, you certainly thought about it at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. So we knew that the Quantum Realm was going to deal with how it was going to be some sort of time travel, and that was thematically appropriate because that's the Quantum Realm. This game was like, I really appreciated how much it did not baby you about how much had happened, right? Like, you needed to watch almost every single Marvel movie, even Thor 2 Dark World, in order to understand everything in this film, with the exception of The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2. I feel like those are the only ones you can really skip and not miss anything in Endgame. But like, you needed to watch all the Guardians, right? You need to watch Guardians 1 in order to get, you know, the family together and the origin of Thanos and then the Power Stone. And really the only reason you needed to watch the second one is because of Mantis. Otherwise, you know, Peter's dad is kind of inconsequential to anything that happened in Endgame. But you needed to watch Iron Man 1, you needed to watch Iron Man 3 and have the relationship with him and his father. You needed to watch all of the Thors, so that, you know, Jane and the Ether and the Dark Elves and Loki, and obviously you needed to watch the Avengers. And it was really fantastic how they brought all of those stories together to where, like, wow, you really needed to see almost everything. And I very much appreciated that. I know not everyone watches all the Marvel movies, or otherwise all of them would have as the same box office success as Black Panther or Captain Marvel or Avengers Endgame or Infinity War would. You know, not most people didn't watch Thor 1 or 2. People really enjoyed Ragnarok, right? Taika Waititi. Awesome job. And, you know, people are definitely on board for him joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. We don't know how that's going to play out, because like they really they don't have a ton of plans for future movies right now. They're focusing on their television content with the Disney Plus, and are letting time pass before they kind of get things going. We only know a few movies right now that are confirmed, where they have put out their plot of the next Disney movies for the next 4 years, and there's like untitled Marvel film, untitled Disney live action, untitled Pixar, right? We know that, but there's a few that we do know that's going to happen. We know there's going to be Black Panther 2, right? We obviously know it's happening. They've signed everybody on. We knew that, you know, like as the first Black Panther came out in theaters, or just shortly after. We know there's going to be a Doctor Strange 2. Obviously, we know Far From Home Spider-Man is happening, and that's seems very interesting how they're dealing with the end of Endgame and how there's now alternate Earths, and this is a different Mysterio. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Jake Gyllenhaal. Very, very interesting. He might be pulling a Booster Gold on us, if you know what I mean, if you read comic books. but basically pretending to be the hero, especially since he's like the master of special effects, at least, in the Earth comics that we know. But this is completely just Mysterio, so he could have actual powers or, different abilities or things like that. But the fact that he's from a different Earth, that what happened with the Infinity Stones and with the snaps and everything, it changed everything. So that definitely opens up a lot of different possibilities of what they can do. Obviously with the Spider-Verse, of course, but also with bringing the X-Men in. And now they have a way of doing that, even though this obviously they didn't know that they were absolutely going to be able to buy out 20th Century Fox before they had all of this planned. But it is definitely a very easy way for them to get all of the mutants into the Marvel Cinematic Universe using this if they want to, or they could just have the mutants pop out of nowhere, as well as getting the Fantastic Four in there, which I really, really hope that they do. So, but we know Black Panther 2 is coming. We know that Doctor Strange 2 is coming. We know that the Inhumans, the Immortals are coming. And we know Guardians 3 is coming eventually. We know that James Gunn has been rehired to do it, but we also know that he was signed on to do Suicide Squad. We can't say 2 because it's pretending that the first one didn't exist, which is, I know we're all very thankful for that because the first Suicide Squad was terrible, but Margot Robbie's still staying on because people like Harley Quinn, and she is having her own movie before that. But it's like Deadshot is not in it. Will Smith's not in it. And it's not being called Suicide Squad 2. I don't know what it's going to be called. Maybe it's going to be The Suicide Squad or Suicide Squad : this, or maybe they're just going to call it The Suicide Squad again. That'd be interesting, just so little removed from the first one. But James Gunn has to do that movie before he does Guardians 3. And we don't know what they're going to do with Thor joining them. Is he going to be like a permanent cast member now? They said like the Hulk's arm is like permanently like damaged, and obviously they can do different kind of healing techniques from special characters or powers or something like that. That's definitely something that they could do if they wanted, but they they definitely hammered home the fact that the dude arm's fucked up, almost killed Thanos, and the gamma radiation definitely gave Hulk a leg up on surviving it, but it's still pretty much disabled his arm, right? But there's obviously going to be possible workarounds if that's what they want to do. It's all up to future writers of a future Hulk movie or a future movie that stars the Hulk, right? We know that Sam and Bucky are having their own television show on Disney Plus. It's going to be 6 episodes long. Sam is going to have the shield. We'll talk about that in a second. Zemo is going to be the bad guy, and they're also bringing back Sharon Carter. So like the end where we all knew as soon as the time travel thing was happening, and the fact that they went to a time where Peggy Carter was there, we knew that that's what was going to end up happening to Cap. It was obvious. You were going to see it. And that's what was going to happen. He was going to travel back and live that life that he always wanted to with the woman that he loved, right? And they handled that really well. We all knew it. Bucky knew it. He was like, yeah, no, he's not coming. He didn't fuck up. He stayed. He knew it. And, Cap's right there. And, he got the dance with Peggy. He lived his life with her. And I think they did a fantastic job at, explaining time travel in the film, where Back to the Future and, everything else, did it wrong. Even Looper does it wrong, which so many people heralded as an amazing explanation for time travel. It's actually the same shit as every other time travel movie, but people are like, oh, look, Bruce Willis said we're not going to use straws, and I could make a diagram and explain time travel, but I'm not going to blah, blah, blah. And people were like, yeah. But it was the same bullshit as any other movie and they even like had someone like make a scar in their past selves in the arm, and then all of a sudden it appears on them. But what Hulk said is absolutely true, where you're acting on your past self's future isn't going to change your present future, right? It was so astutely and quickly done that you might not have caught it or understood it, but it was actually a very, very good explanation. And there's, I'm sure there's like articles written about like how that explanation worked, and is actually handled really, really well, where it shows that fucking up the past didn't change your present, because if you just want to like listen to it again, where Hulk goes over, messing with your past self doesn't change your present's future, or, something like that. It was very, very well explained, and I liked that, and that was really cool. So, having Cap being back there and giving the shield to Sam, people thought that, he should give it to Bucky as his best friend or not, but we know Bucky wouldn't accept that. That's not that he knows that he can never trust his mind. We don't know exactly what Shuri and the team in Wakanda did to him once they froze him after Winter Soldier, where he knew he couldn't be trusted because of Zemo and all of that, and, killing the Starks and all the other terrible things that he did, which maybe we'll see in a Black Widow movie, because obviously she was aware of, the legend of what he did. So that would be pretty cool if he was like Winter Soldier again in her film, which they could definitely easily do in any time frame in the past, whether it be like her origin or, a few years in. But what was I going to say? But, the shield, Bucky would not have accepted that. He knows that he can't trust himself. He can't forgive himself for what he's done. He knows that's not a mantle he can honestly take and hold and trust himself with. And, Bucky has been Captain America in the comics, but so has Sam. There's, been a couple. So, either would have been a good choice, source material wise, but Sam was the correct choice in the characters that we did know, and was very interesting in what Cap said, where, this is your shield, and maybe he didn't just go to the past, maybe Cap went to the future. He says it is yours. Maybe it's because he went to the future and saw who the shield should go to and what would happen if he did, and maybe that really is future Sam's shield. So like that's a really cool speculative thing that we might see very much touched on in the Sam and Falcon show, or the Bucky and Sam show on Disney Plus, which comes out next August 2020. So that'd be really cool to see. There's going to be a Wanda and Vision show that we know. We don't really know how the Vision's coming back, right? Like, Cap could have done something, since he had all the stones at the end, but they didn't really seem to play that off as even a thought in anyone's minds to do anything with the stones and Vision. But somehow he's coming back, right? Because there's going to have that show, and I think she said that it takes place in like the 50s or something like that. So we don't really know how that show is going to work, but Paul Bettany's going to be back, right, in some capacity or another, and that's really cool. And there's gonna be like a what if animated series on which, there's been plenty of comics of, and the first episode is what if Peggy Carter gets the super soldier serum, and Cap is still like a weakling, and he gets like a mech suit made by Howard Stark. So that's really cool, and we have really awesome things to look forward to after Endgame. But I thought it was really cool with the time travel going through to the first Avengers in New York, where they figured out there was 3 stones there on the same day, and using that unused footage from Dark World, where Thor, you had people shitting on the new Thor because they're like it's fat shaming or anything, but you were not paying attention to anything. You're just looking to get mad if that's what you got out of shape Thor. Rocket makes a joke that he looks like a melted ice cream, right? And that's really the only thing that's at expense of his appearance. But of course, you're going to make the dude's clearly depressed. He's clearly down in the dumps and he's drunk and things like that. So like, yeah, that's what is going to happen. It's not saying that, overweight people are bad or anything like that. And it wasn't about him getting back into shape, right? He's still a, pudgy guy with, fanciful beard hair when he gets Stormbreaker and Mjolnir back. But it wasn't about him being out of shape. And, his mom does say, eat a salad, but, she's looking out for her boy, right? It's about him getting over his failure that you see him coping with at the beginning, where he's pissed because, should have went for the head, right? He knows that he could have stopped it. He made a mistake and he lost. and he has to deal with that grief, right? He has to deal with knowing that he could have stopped it, he could have prevented it, but he made a mistake, and has to deal with the guilt, and that many of them are dealing with, that, you know, quadrillions died, or pentillions, or, you know, whatever, half of the universe died because of their failure to stop Thanos in the snap, right? So, like, it doesn't have to it has nothing to do with, like, oh, Thor's fat, that makes him bad now. It's like the dude was depressed and you know, fearful of his past self's failures, and didn't feel like he could do anything. He didn't feel like he was good enough. And then he gets the pep talk with his mom. It was like, not only did he get to have a final conversation with the mother that he had already previously lost, but she instills in him what he needs in that moment. And then he calls Mjolnir, and he's just like, yes, I am still worthy. Like, that is his story. It's not just the fact that he got fat and all of a sudden that's because, you know, oh, because he's lazy and whatever, and plays video games. And it's not about fat shaming. And while we're on the subject of video games, as I am a video game guy, it makes no sense that Korg was able to talk to a guy on Fortnite that was not part of his team. You cannot do that in Fortnite. You cannot talk to a random person that is not on your team. It was still funny, yes, that, you know, he had Thor threatened Noob Master 69 or whatever, and Korg was being bullied. It was funny, even though it was not video game accurate when it comes to voice chat. But it was still entertaining for what it was worth. And people had problems with, you know, like the women teaming up for that shot. They felt like it was forced or pandering. Some women loved it. Some women hated it. And of course, that's what you're going to get. The directors really struggled with the decision of whether to do that or not. And there was talks from, I believe it was the actress who plays Valkyrie. Her name is escaping me right now. She's in the new Men in Black with Chris Hemsworth, which is funny. She approached them with the idea of an all-female movie, which, you know, some people would love and some people would hate. Obviously, we've talked about those kinds of people previously in this podcast, where they just can't stand women being in power and being a main character and doing cool things. This is for boys. Fuck you guys. But yeah, some people liked it, some people didn't, and some people liked it, but like it wasn't good enough. You know, you can't please everybody. It was an amazing shot and sequence where all the Avengers assembled, where Sam said "on your left," and then boom, out pops everybody. Like, you know, if you were in the theater, especially in the first few days where people are seeing it for the first time and not the second or third time. I saw it twice because, you know, who didn't? Biggest movie of all time, am I right? Take that, Avatar. You didn't mean shit to pop culture. This movie meant everything to pop culture. You know, everyone like screaming, you know, when Black Panther and Shuri and Wakabi were there, and then going crazy when the Guardians came back, and then losing their fucking minds when Peter's back, and, you know, hugging Tony and all that. It was an amazing scene. It felt like watching a comic book when that fight was going down, when Captain Marvel was there kicking ass, and the pain in Elizabeth Olsen's voice and face when she's like, you took everything from me, and she just fucking ended up going. Because if you guys are not familiar with comic books, and I know most people who watch the movies are not, Scarlet Witch really is the most powerful. And I even saw a fucking article today where it said like Thanos, Captain Marvel, Thanos actually is the most powerful in whatever. And no, he's not. Scarlet Witch is the most powerful. That is dutifully shown in the movies and especially in the comic books. She's able to destroy a stone while holding off Thanos in Infinity War, right? And she's able to fucking fight him one-on-one and do, you know, throw away those giant driller things in Infinity War because, yeah, she is the most powerful. House of M exists solely because of what Scarlet Witch did. She is one of the most powerful. She is super duper strong. She is like an S tier power character mutant, or I forget what the classifications of mutant power is, but she is like the strongest one, up there with like Dark Phoenix. And she has shown this power time and time again in comics. Does it make her the best character? No. Does it make her the main character? No. But you have to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, she is the most powerful Avenger. Like, you cannot argue that if you've paid attention to the movies or any of the comic books. Like, just read House of M. That's all because of what Scarlet Witch did, right? And Captain Marvel is Earth's mightiest Avenger. That's who she is. Yes, she is more powerful than, like, the three most powerful Avengers that were shown in this series of films is Scarlet Witch, Captain Marvel, and Thor, and then Hulk. Those are easily the strongest ones. If you cannot understand that, then I can't help you. Then you're an idiot or a misogynist or blind to obvious things, because it's all right there. And if you've read any of the source material, you'll see it's hammered home even more so when you take a look at Civil War and the importance of taking Hulk out of that situation and doing the Planet Hulk, which was kind of represented in Ragnarok, and the fact that having that clone of Thor in the comics was, such a big deal. And, I did expect more Captain Marvel in the movie because of, why did we lose? Because you didn't have me. She's fucking right. If Captain Marvel was there in Infinity War, they would have won. She is that. She was going fucking toe to toe with this dude. He couldn't land a blow on her. He had to freaking pick the Power Stone out of his gauntlet and punch her, right? Like, he had to use a stone to even lay a hand on Captain Marvel. Yes, she is that powerful. And if you have a problem with that, then we don't need you. Fuck off. So, people were having problems with that. Obviously, Thanos' blade was something that's stronger than not adamantium. Because it was destroying a Cap's shield. So obviously, it was something stronger than vibranium. Maybe it was Oru. Maybe it was something else. Joe Russo said that, this dude's been fighting everywhere across many planets. He's obviously has to have the best weapon. He's done so many things, and it makes sense for him to have something that's stronger than vibranium, and maybe vibranium isn't as strong as we thought it was. We are actually, only constrained to what we know of Earth. Even though we've had some space exploration within the MCU, we haven't seen anything. So, it was a bit of a surprise to see something chew up his shield that relatively easily. But this is fucking still, it's Thanos that we're talking about. An original Iron Man villain taken out by Iron Man. It was thematic as fuck. It was a great way to end the third phase. Well, actually, Far From Home is the last movie of the third phase, but it was a very good conclusion to the Tony Stark story and to the Captain America, Steve Rogers story. And you could easily argue that the three Captain America films are the best and one of the best trilogies ever. But Infinity War and Endgame were fantastic ways to end this thing, and was brilliantly done, brilliantly approached. It was so impressive when the first Avengers movie came out, and they were able to do a movie with so many big stars and big characters and do it right and make it feel good and make it feel like a comic book, where, most comic books that you read isn't just the hero, right? Because they still live within the same universe. So it only makes sense to have more than one of your characters in a single comic book. And that's what most of the big storylines are, whether you're talking about Identity Crisis or New 52 or Blackest Night, Brightest Day, or, Fallen, Kingdom Come, or Civil War, or things like that. The big storylines are going to have the most, all the characters, and you have, Avengers line of comic books. You have Fantastic Four, you have Spider-Man, where they're always interacting with numerous characters because that's the universe and the world that they lived in. And before seeing Endgame, the movie, the comic book film that seemed most like a graphic novel to me actually was Wolverine. In the way that it was shot, the kind of story and tone that it had, it felt like I was reading a dark, gritty uh, graphic novel, and it was actually not even based off of, I mean, it's loosely based off of Old Man Logan, but the story was unique enough to warrant itself as not truly an adaptation, at least in my mind. It was not proposed to be an adaptation to Old Man Logan, but that really felt like reading a graphic novel, and watching all these Avengers movies felt like reading a comic book. And, you know, at the end, that should be the goal. And, you know, once again, as was, we were talking about Game of Thrones, did a fantastic job at doing an adaptation of a fictional universe and a fictional series of books, but showing their own story within the cinematic universe. Obviously, Game of Thrones is just an adaptation of all these books, where it's going to be, you know, some changes, obviously, as anything would. But the, you know, outside of, you know, a few key plot points, like the first Avengers, they were kind of assembled very similarly, fighting Loki, because of what Loki did. In the comics, they did that very, very well, but very, very differently in the movies, and created their own world, their own characters, where some things are, you know, similar and some things are quite different in, you know, the ages of characters or how characters are established. Like, there's not really that thing between, you know, Peter Parker and Tony Stark in any comic book that I've ever read. But, you know, they're always using kid Spider-Man in all these movies, where the Spider-Man stopped being a kid in like the 8th issue ever of Spider-Man. So people are always going to be obsessed with high school Spider-Man. I honestly don't understand why. Spider-Man has been an adult in everything that I've ever read in my entire life, and most people's lives. Obviously, there's been, you know, all kinds of reboots, and you have different Spider-Mans like Miguel O'Hara or Miles Morales, or, you know, John Mulaney's Spider-Pig. And obviously you have Spider-Gwen, who I'm a huge fan of, who I hope gets her own movie. But regardless, fantastic job with Endgame. I thought that was very, very well done, with the action sequences, the cinematography, the storylines, the wrap-ups. And obviously there are people that have their problems with things like, glorifying like abusive parents with Howard Stark or whatever. It's like, you're missing the story. That is not what the story is. That's not what it's condoning. You know, it's not about this or that, or, you know, there will always be people that try to be angry at something for angry's sake, but I thoroughly enjoyed the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Endgame and Infinity War for what they were. They did a fantastic job at doing what they set out to do, and I thought the same of Game of Thrones. Neither of them were perfect in absolutely every way, and nothing ever ends up the way that you thought it would, because that's not your game. You're part of the audience, and you are not in control, and that might be, you know, upsetting at sometimes, but that's what fan fiction is for. People, you don't need to sign a fucking petition because things didn't go up your way and you aren't Boba Fett. So, but anyways, those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think about said things in the comments below. If you listened this far, I do truly appreciate it. Leave a comment or a rating if you did, and I'll talk to you guys next time.